I have been itching to have a private discussion with Your Excellency. Never had the opportunity, even while I was at a dining table some years back. But now I have you. So we want to discuss a few things. And one is basically one of the things our keynote speaker yesterday stressed on. And also in the summary, it was the first point raised, which is sustained rapid economic growth. There were three major points the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia mentioned, but I'm going to stick to one, and that's the first one. He said a commitment to inclusive, sustained economic growth. And that, Your Excellency, is something that in the last 6 years or so should have been keeping you awake from time to time, but it's probably one of the pillars of any nation's growth is that commitment. How can we, as a nation, go into that rarefied space of double-digit economic growth?
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. I think that obviously this will be a whole afternoon to talk about how we need to get to double-digit growth. But some of the key issues that I think we should look at are, first, the very notion of a productive economy, an economy that is focused on productivity and all that enables productivity. And you will find immediately that there will be some constraints. So, for example, population growth at the rate that we're going, we need to, if we're not, if we don't, and maybe we'll have time to dimension that in some detail, but population growth is obviously an issue, especially where productivity isn't matching population growth at all. Now, that population also requires education. Of course, we all know that the vast majority of our population is young people, but that's also the strength of our nation and the strength of our economy. So education is a crucial part of being able to grow our economy. Relevant education, education that emphasizes critical analysis, that emphasizes collaboration, which are some of the critical issues today. In an education that also, of course, emphasizes technology. Now, then there are questions around gender equality as well, because really, if half of your population is not productive on account of lack of education or getting married too early and all sorts of other such issues, then you have already constrained productivity from the beginning, because obviously your entire population must be committed to the objective of productivity. So we've got to look at those sorts of issues, right? So the whole range of human capacity development, healthcare, ensuring that people are healthy and able to be productive, and that they have access to health and all of those things. So I think that there are so many components of productivity, but I think an overriding theme for me is the whole question of an economy that focuses on value addition, as opposed to just selling raw materials or selling oil without the value addition that is required. And sometimes the questions that arise around value addition, and people will ask the question, okay, so how do you add value in an economy where you're basically not, where you require power, you need to import a lot of your components and all that. But then there are all sorts of incredible examples of even where people have power constraints, even India, and countries like that, that have power constraints. These are cost issues. Yes, with improved power, you can actually produce cheaper. But these should not be a hindrance. So those are some of my initial thoughts, yes.
Chichi?
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Only last week, the president of the Ford Foundation, where I work, announced that Ford will be divesting its over $1 billion from fossil fuel investments. And we're dependent on fossil fuel. I read your articles and I have heard you talk about this, and you are not in support of this because you believe that this will hurt Africa very much. But the reality is that the world is moving away from fossil fuel. What is Nigeria doing and going to be doing to ensure that we are not taken by surprise and that we are prepared for the inevitable?
I think, first of all, being aware of what the real challenges are is important. And frankly, a lot of African countries and especially African petroleum or gas-producing countries appear to have more or less been somewhat asleep at the wheel on these questions of defunding of fossil fuels projects and all that. And I think that what is crucial is for us to pay attention to this, because we are confronted, so the world is confronted with a climate crisis, and we are part of the world. But we are also confronted with an existential crisis of poverty and of even mortality, maternal mortality, and all of the various challenges that come with extreme poverty. So while the world, especially the wealthier countries, are focused on climate change and climate change alone, we have to be focused not just on climate change, but access to energy, which is a major constraint that we have. And we also have to keep reminding ourselves and reminding policymakers that even in terms of even in terms of how much pollution we're actually responsible for, it's a minor fraction to what the rest of the world is responsible for. I mean, so for example, the US does 15.5 tons per capita of emissions. We here, as the average in Africa, is about 0.1%, and we have far less power, we have far less access to energy. So the truth of the matter is that this transition to zero emissions by 2050 or 2060 or whenever must be based on fairness and equity and justice. And I think it's important for us to keep emphasizing this and to also negotiate this. So we shouldn't be negotiating just national contributions, which is what the NDCs, which is what we spend a lot of our time doing. We must negotiate the terms of this transition. We must ensure that the $100 billion a year that the OECD countries promised as funds towards the transition for developing economies, that they are faithful to that promise. So I think that really it's time for a lot of hard bargaining, a lot of hard-nosed bargaining, and we mustn't be shy of stating very clearly that yes, we are part of this whole movement for zero emissions, and we believe in it, but we are not the worst polluters, and we are being asked to make the greatest sacrifice, and this is, if you look at it, today we experience severe manifestations of climate change, flooding in various parts of our country. But this climate change that we're experiencing, the manifestations of it were not caused by us. We didn't cause this, but we receive practically all of the problems associated with it. So I think it's important that there be fairness. It's important that there be justice. And we must simply be very hard-nosed about this. Yes.
Okay. We know that this is a very young country. Both the Ford Foundation and MacArthur Foundation had put up, I believe, $5 million fund. And of course, if we just reel back a year ago, somewhere in June or July, the federal government had also put aside 75 billion naira for investing in the youth. Now, two things, actually a number of things. One is that how is the utilization of that fund and the impact, particularly on the youth? Of course, it is targeting the youth. But the other one is actually a debate that I had with somebody this morning about what I call the dumbbell effect. Dumbbell is, I lift weights these days. So I have maybe 5 kg on each side, I lift it. Nigeria exports crude oil, that's one of the heavy weights, but it is a dying product or service to the world. But we do not factor in the export, albeit begrudgingly, which is the intellectual capital that is leaving the shores of Nigeria. I chair a company, a startup, where we lost 5 developers, 4 to Canada, 1 to Netherlands. Now, if it is done deliberately, that can also be a source of investment or cash flow or FDI coming back to the country. Because when they create more, there are opportunities of creating jobs, both globally as well as locally. So if you can address the two-pronged question, which is coming out more as a statement than a question, Your Excellency, if you can touch on both elements. But the aim is the youth.
Okay. First, let me say that the only way to ensure that young people don't vote with their feet is to create the environment that makes it rewarding, especially economically rewarding, for them to remain here. And there is a competition for resources. There's a competition for human resources all across the world. So you're going to find that, young people will move in the direction where their resources, where their human resources are best appreciated in terms of what they earn. Now, that is not new, because if you look at several countries of the world, you'll find that there's huge migration. The Indians, the Chinese, moving in the direction where they are best appreciated. So it's not necessarily a Nigerian phenomenon, but I think the most important thing to emphasize is, so how then do we create the circumstances that enable us to retain the talents that we have? How do we create those circumstances? Now, there are all manner of things. One, of course, is the business environment itself. Is the business environment one that's favorable? Truth is that there are very many reasons, and just as you tell the stories of failure, the stories of success are also there. I mean, you mustn't forget that of the 5 so-called unicorn startups, 4 of them are Nigerians and based here in Nigeria. I mean, your Flutterwaves, your Opes, InterSwitch, etc. So that's an important point to make. So it does mean that there is something to be said for the environment even as it is. In other words, you can find accessible, cheap capital, right? Now, I'm talking of human resources now. And then in terms of also funding, and today funding comes from practically anywhere, right? Which is helpful. So for me, I think that the most important thing is how do we create this environment? You've spoken about some of the funds that are available. So the youth fund is one, the 75 billion youth fund. There's also the IDICE fund, the the Investment and Enterprise Fund that is promoted now by the AFDB with Nigeria. There's, and then the central bank also has a creativity fund. What we've tried to do is we have a creativity and advisory group, a technology creativity advisory group, which really tries to bring in, young entrepreneurs, innovators, etc., to define policy, to try and formulate policy with policymakers. And we've been reasonably successful because you'll find that, okay, so for fintech, there's a wide range of licenses that the CBN is now able to give. And a lot of that was on account of the advice from these young men and women in the advisory groups. So, the payment solution licenses, the super agent licenses, the mobile operator licenses that you can now get without necessarily being a deposit-taking bank are examples of how to make the environment right for this sort of thing. And, I mean, Flutterwave, for example, I believe now has a super agent bank, a super agent license, which is an enabler. You would go to other countries, and that's the honest truth. Several of the countries that have been held up as some sort of models, and you will not get the kind of licenses that we're talking about. You won't get that sort of slice of the pie. So I think that as we go forward, we must just really make it easier. And for the startups, a lot of these funds will be helpful. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how to formulate policy around access to capital, because there are several funds. If you aggregate the funds today, you are looking at almost $750 billion, right, in terms of naira, in terms of just funds that are available. But you hear the same complaints. We can't access this money. How do we get these funds? So I think that one of the very critical things that we need to do is working with entrepreneurs, working with the young men and women who are innovators, try and find the ways by which we can actually make access to capital easier. How do we de-risk these funds so that they're able to access them? Because obviously you want to make sure that these funds are, can be paid back, But again, if you look at some of the investors in technology and innovation, they're not asking for, they're asking for equity. Many are not asking for an arm and a leg or any kind of collateral. So we must move in that general direction and, be able to put up the kind of patient capital that would make a difference in this, for these things. So I think that it's an evolving, process. It's an evolving space. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot to contribute to, just in terms of formulating policy. But we're really at the beginnings and, frankly, at the inception of pretty exciting times for startups and for businesses in Nigeria. Yes.
My question is, how are we ensuring, actually, as we're talking about the future, 50% of our population are women, 50% of people in the economy, especially in the informal sector, are women. What is the government doing and going to be doing to ensure that women are protected in the workplace, especially as we do not have a violence against persons policy in the workplace? How do we ensure that as the future of work is being discussed, that we are also discussing the underbelly and the protection of the vulnerable people in the workplace, especially women?
Okay, I think first, again, we must acknowledge that we don't even have an option with ensuring that women are as productive as they are able to, and they are, that they are treated equally in every way in terms of the human capital development, in terms of access to justice, in terms of access to benefits. Because aside from everything else, it makes economic sense. It's absolutely the sensible thing to do. So I think that as a starting point, we must persuade ourselves and our people that this is not a favor. I mean, that equal rights for women, dealing with gender issues with the sensitivity and importance that should be attached to it, is not a favor.
Indeed.
being done to women. It's a universal benefit. It benefits every one of us if we're able to do so. I think that mindset is crucial because, okay, so we have the laws, we have the violence against persons laws and all that, but you find that social habits are not catching up with the laws. So enforcement of the laws become difficult because social habits are not catching up. I mean, you still find people confront women who go out, who are harassed or who are even raped or assaulted in one shape or form or the other. Before law enforcement, of course, who are mostly male, the kinds of experiences that they go through are, at best, they are just humiliating in most cases. And when you get the feedback, for instance, in my office, we have a rule of law team in my office, where we've been doing quite a bit of work with the various states on the Violence Against Persons Act, Child Rights Act, and all of that. Trying to get the states to domesticate these laws and all that. And then all sorts of other sensitization efforts being made. But you find that it really must start with an understanding of why this makes sense for us. Because really, it goes beyond just making laws. It comes down to enforcement. Because the laws we've made are there, but we're not getting the benefits of those laws because it's taking a bit of time for culture and for social habits, negative social habits by and large, to catch up with where we are in terms of legislation. So I think that a lot more sensitization is required. I think that a lot more publicity should be given to those who are punished for these kinds of activities. We should, so for example, sexual harassment. It is only where people are caught red-handed or something that you'll find that there is any. So perhaps we should be looking at policies in the workplace that emphasize, reportability, emphasize the giving young women the access or women the access to be able to complain, and that this should be heard and attended to by persons who have some training in these things. So I personally believe that we are, and in some ways when you compare us with several other parts of the world, especially even the more developed economies of the world, I think that just in terms of the legislation, in terms of policy, we are almost where they are. But we need to really, sensitize social behavior a lot more so that we can catch up with this. But so it's both policy, legislation, but my view is that more importantly, how do we change mindsets? Yeah, I think the political will is evident, frankly, because the political will is what is demonstrated through policy and laws. But it goes beyond political will. You must now have, the capacity to change minds. So people who regard women as chattel, it goes beyond political will to change their minds about that. People who think that women are inferior, you've got to have, it's a mindset thing. You have the laws that say all of us are created equal. Then you have the laws against violence. Then you have, policy and all of that. But you still need that extra bit of sensitization to get people to the point. Yes.
Yes. It is said, and it's one of my beliefs, that whatever you envision becomes your life. I.e., if the vision is for a Nigeria that is a major factor in the global economy, then it shall happen. Now, we have been talking about Nigeria's potential for a great deal of time. Now, whether it is political will or in executing those nice plans that we come up with, because as our keynote speaker highlighted, the idea of industrial parks was literally lifted from Nigeria, and they tend to do a better job of implementing than us. But I may be mistaken. Maybe we have here and there some spots where that has been functioning well. Now, there is a transition going on globally from factor-based economy to what I would call knowledge-based economy. We are seeing it around. We've just discussed it. The digital transformation is going at a very faster pace. That basically means one of the key factors, which is education, need to be tweaked, need to be indeed disrupted in such a manner that what we call traditional education must change. We look at the inflows, capital inflows into Nigeria. In the great old days when oil had gone up to 100 or above 100, we used to see that bucket, that pillar is the largest. Today, it is the diaspora remittances and very little FDI. We used to see 60 to 80 billion at one time coming in for FDI, and then maybe another 60 or so crude oil. Today, it is the third pillar, which is Nigerians outside sending money, that has become the major contributor. But money actually comes to an environment that is receptive. Ease of doing business, seen Dr. Jumoke, and also the rule of law. Many other things that can resist inflow of capital can be lifted. Now, what can you say about some of those various levers that I have touched on? Education, probably good healthcare, possibly improving on the ease of doing business. Nigeria has moved tremendously, by the way. I'm not discounting that, but there is a lot more that needs to happen. What can you talk to? Can you take us through that in your mind, and also the vision you would have going forward for Nigeria?
First with education, I think that there's no question at all that we have to really move along with education especially education that's relevant to the sorts of opportunities and jobs that are available today. And so there's no question at all that we must emphasize, especially science, technology, engineering, and maths, the so-called STEM. And we say STEAM because we add the arts to it. So that's an area of emphasis for us. That's an area where, of course, the curriculum is being redeveloped in order to be able to accommodate that. But the truth is that even with the best curriculum, you obviously must have the sorts of teachers that you require to instruct in these areas. And even for teaching, a whole reorientation is required, even for teaching. So you're teaching people now, this is not learning by rote. You're teaching people collaboration, you're teaching people, critical inquiry skills, so you're teaching in a completely different way. So all of that is also factored into teacher training and the various models. And there are quite a few models that have been developed, quite a few models that have been experimented with already. But I think that, the major challenge is for us to be able to adopt this at the state level. Because don't forget that basic education, primary education, and secondary are really the province of the states, as opposed to the federal government. The federal government does not handle primary education or secondary education. Yes, we do have a couple of unity schools, some unity schools, but these are really the business of the states. So in all that we're trying to do, so we're developing a STEM or STEAM in our case, curriculum and also teaching. And we need to really get these into the various states of the Federation. we have quite a few states at the level of the National Economic Council, which I have the privilege of chairing. One of the things that we try to do is to look at the whole human capital development space, so education and healthcare. And we have a whole dashboard where we're looking at, so how far has Zamfara gone? How far has Benue gone? How far has Ekiti gone, or Lagos, or for that matter, Imo or Anambra? How far have they gone, just in terms of educational development? So what the federal government tries to do essentially is to set the standards, and then support in whatever way that is possible. But it's a huge enterprise, this business of education. Clearly, it's a massive enterprise. And I think that, we're also finding a lot of entrepreneurial activity even around it, So we're finding a lot of educational type tech that is for, some of them are used for in primary schools. I know that Borno State, for example, is adopting some of these edutech type models and all of that. Edo State is also adopting that, and the Edo Best and all that. So I think that this is a huge enterprise, and we must just keep our focus on what we need to do, namely the curriculum and teacher training. Then the other questions around where our place will be in the fourth industrial revolution. My sense of that is that we have the best advantage, which is that we have young people. The majority of our population, over 60%, are under 25. They are creative, they're innovative, they're ready to go. What we really need to do, of course, as I've said earlier, is to see how we can support them, access to capital, training, etc. But the other good thing is that there's a lot of self-education that is involved in technology. And so we find that, people are training themselves in software development, in program writing, code writing, etc. And we're finding that they're able to do this at great, that they're able to do this with a lot of, with support. So I think that we're in a good place, quite frankly, but there is a lot that can be done. And I'm a strong believer in the fact that government's business must be to just take care of the macro issues and ensure that we have, at least access to capital, access to good training and all that. And we tried that, we experimented with that quite a bit with our Empower program, where we gave tablets, such as the one I have here, to about 300,000 or so of these young people. And those tablets were loaded with material for entrepreneurial training, material for code writing, software, writing skills, etc., software development skills and all that. And, many of them were able to benefit. Others just wanted to, were extension workers, public health workers, etc. So they had the training material. So it's now possible for us to train millions of people. We have an open portal. You can simply you can go up to that open portal with your device, whether it's a phone or tablet. So I think that the opportunities are huge for training and for getting many young people into that space.
Wonderful. Dr. Chichi.
Yes, Your Excellency. A while back, I read a survey that surprised me. It was a survey that talked to investors who go to, who invest in different countries and, of course, who move to those countries at some point. And they were asked what was the top most important things that, incentivized them to go to a country. And surprisingly, they said good education for their children was number one, good health care for their family was number two, and number three was leisure, good leisure for themselves and for their family. And for most of them who were then interviewed, they said profit was important, but not the most important thing, but the good quality of life for them and their children, wherever it is they're moving to, because they are going to live there and they want to have good quality of life. these are amenities that we're still struggling with in our country. And maybe because we still look at them from a social amenities perspective, when we talk about healthcare or education, we're looking at it as, social services that we're providing to our people. And we also know that there's a lot of leakages in terms, of tax avoidance for many companies that are making it difficult for us to have the funding that is required to actually provide these amenities. Will it make a difference in the way we provide services in the country if the government begins to see social amenities not just as a service to people, but also as a critical part of attracting investors? Will it incentivize us to begin to invest in our healthcare, in our education, in order to meet international standards?
Absolutely. I fully agree, that even not just for attracting investments, even for the standards of living of people who live here. I think it's an important thing because, just as you said, yes, general well-being, the happiness of individuals, how they feel, especially when they have children, it's even more so. They want their children to have the best possible facilities, etc. So there's no question at all, in my view, about improvement of social services for purposes of ensuring the well-being of individuals. I think that's absolutely a case that makes itself. But the question then is, how do you get to that point? And a lot, in my view, would have to do with, obviously, government policy and government action. But I also think that we must be ready for why government action is not always as effective as it ought to be. But just take healthcare, for example. So healthcare is a matter that we, at the moment, fund from budget. So it depends a great deal on revenues. And of course, we have, huge revenue challenges. So what is the antidote to that, or what's our answer to that? The answer to that is healthcare insurance, compulsory insurance. Now, compulsory insurance ensures that we're able to pool resources, that we're able to aggregate resources from premiums that everyone pays and the government pays for those who who cannot do so. So without compulsory health insurance, we simply cannot bring together the resources that are required to provide decent health care for 200 people growing by 5 million every year. There's no way we can provide those resources. So I think that the first thing is, as an example, healthcare. First thing is, what do we need to do that will be a game changer? And I think that game changer is health insurance. And when you then look at it, okay, so public health, we've been able to more or less set a standard for public health. And that was seen in our COVID-19 response. And I think that our response to COVID-19, a major public health challenge, was probably one of the best anywhere in the world, just in terms of the response. And why is that so? Why was that so? Reason is that we've had years of developing a public health system. So we're familiar with how to deal with Lassa fever, how to deal with malaria, how to deal with polio. We've done immunizations on scale, and unlike other countries that haven't done any immunization except immunization of children at birth, we have a lot of experience, and we have a lot of experienced hands in doing so. But clinical health is an area where we have deficiencies. So we need to better equip hospitals. We need to develop formats around how even hospital care makes sense for those who are providing the service. In other words, they're able to make money from it and reinvest. And how it also makes sense from the point of view of the patient who mustn't always be paying out of pocket. So we're at a point now with the Healthcare Reform Committee, which I have the privilege of chairing, where we're looking at all these options and we're trying to see in what ways can we ensure that this would work. So there are huge, if you like, huge revolutionary changes that need to be made. And I believe that they are entirely possible. I believe they're entirely possible. And that we're at a point where, these things are accessible to us. We can do these things. And so I am certainly looking forward to, especially in the healthcare sector, some of the reform that is possible. Just a few days ago, we were opening a hospital in Lagos where, this is supposed to reverse the medical tourism that we find and all that. And what this hospital was able to show us is, first of all, the sheer number of doctors in diaspora who are experts in their various fields, who are coming home to work. Now, the doctor who comes to consult and do his operations is still available for work elsewhere, And so, even the way medical service is delivered today is so radically different from the way it used to be that it is possible now to get the best of help. While we were there in one theater, we were able to communicate with some other expert who was, I believe was in the US, who was able to talk to us. So even medicine, telemedicine is entirely possible, it's available. So I think, that there is, in my view, these are exciting times. There's a lot that we can do.
Lovely.
So I definitely believe that we can do a lot.
Talking about leisure, there is an element that you touched on, and I want you to elaborate a bit, and that is that if we look at the GDP of Nigeria, the combination of the creative industry, meaning Nollywood, the music, artistic endeavors such as painting, sculpture, combined is about 8 to nearly 9% of our GDP. Oil and gas is less than that. And it creates more jobs. And therefore, we should also focus on that. Of course, you've mentioned about the CBN Intervention Fund. Are there any purposeful policy-related issues that is pushing resources into that aspect, since job creation is one of the major goals or objectives of this administration?
I spoke earlier about the Technology and Creativity Advisory Group, and really the creativity aspect of it is that is the Nollywoods and the entertainment and that whole industry. And I think that, again, there's support in terms of funding. But what I've found is really that we're not able to, because entertainment, the infrastructure that's required, the ecosystem, the needs of that ecosystem are not this. So it's different for instance, from an innovator who can say, this is my product, I'll need X amount of money to take it to market, and then we can all make money. So the actor requires infrastructure, requires studios and services like that, as opposed to necessarily money in their hands. So it is a slightly different model, and what we've been trying to do is to see how we can be more effective in getting resources that are the right type of resources for creativity. So, and there's a huge deficit in terms of infrastructure, studios where people can record, dance studios, etc., places where people can record films and things like that. There's a huge deficit. And we think that with some of the funding that we're seeing, there's a major project that's going on around the National Theatre in Lagos, which is funded by the banks, by the CBN and our banks. And this is devoted entirely to creativity. So there will be we'll find that creating a hub of that sort, where you have studios, you have all sorts of facilities, will be helpful, But I think that this is a massive area, it's an area where we certainly need a lot more investment, a lot more government investment, and a lot more private sector investment. And people are beginning to see that this is, and thankfully is one of those areas that grew organically, right? So I mean, we just suddenly found almost that, well, here we have Nollywood, and then here we have all these incredible entertainers who are using social media in particular to get their messages across and get their art across. So I think that so long as government doesn't get in the way, because again, too much government can become a hindrance. I think that once we're able to support in creative and innovative ways, we should be able to do something in that area.
Right. Okay. Dr. Chichi.
Yeah, this is my last question, Your Excellency, and it's on civil society. A nascent economy as Nigeria needs all the help that it can get, and civil society organizations have traditionally played a role in supporting communities and areas, that the government has sometimes struggled with. But more recently in Nigeria, we're beginning to see the closing of civil society space. We're finding that the idea that instead of seeing civil society as being partners in development, there is a tendency to see them more as being obtrusive and and needing to be restructured or caged or whatever. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are around that, because if you look internationally, civil society organizations have a space internationally, and they're listened to, and sometimes even more than governments. And so being able to cultivate a civil society that is a partner to government is a good way to go. Let me just put it that way. But that does not seem to be the approach that we are seeing. The space is closing, and a lot of civil society, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa, civil society organizations are feeling a lot of pressure from government, whether it is through policies and laws or directly. And so my question is, what is your response to that, and how is the government going to support civil society in partnership to be able to improve the economy and everything else?
Okay, first, I'm probably not the best person to ask, because I also have, as you know, a civil society background. So I completely sympathize with how civil society is perceived as irritants and as dangerous people getting funding from abroad to be subversive and all sorts of such characterizations. But I think that the truth is that civil society is relevant because we have no choice. It's absolutely relevant because, so here you have a space. So you have the public space, you have the private space. But there are people who must do stuff that is not for profit and that benefits society. And that space must grow. We have absolutely no choice with that space, because when you look at it, even if you look at the activities of civil society, because it's a wide spectrum, of course. Look at northeast, the northeast where you have conflicts. You have a plethora of civil society groups working every day in those spaces, places where no one else will go, or at least nobody else. Even if you paid them, they wouldn't go there. So these are active people in these spaces. I think where you may have tensions is civil society groups in the areas of civil and political rights, human rights, and all of that, which are areas of natural tension with government, And I'm not so sure that the time will come when you will not experience those tensions. I think that those tensions are because here you have government has a monopoly of force, right? Then you have these other guys who, are saying that we want to hold you to account. The honest truth is that nobody really wants to be held to account, right? That's the honest truth. If you can avoid being held to account, nobody would. So, but I think that what must happen is that civil society groups must press their claim to what it is that they're entitled to. I mean, we had civil society groups even in the military. Under the military, we had civil liberties organization, we had integrity, we had quite a few organizations that simply said, we are going to insist on the rights of people, we are going to insist on political rights or civil rights and all of that. So I think that civil society groups must also understand that these tensions are going to be there, but they must, and in the democratic space, it's easier. It's much easier. So they must, as it were, be bold and be assertive and work as much as possible. And I also think that sometimes, it's possible to work with governments, and we do quite a bit of work, by the way. I mean, for instance, in practically all of the work we do on gender issues and all of that, it's in collaboration with civil society. All the work we did, the Social Investment Fund that Miriam Uwais was working on, it's a huge, massive thing, was all with civil society. In fact, we invited civil society to audit the process. About 5, 6 different civil society groups audited the process and published a report. So I think, it works. But my sense of it is that we must, we will always have those tensions, and those in civil society must also, find out, we've just got to be ready to keep engaging government. But frankly, I don't know that there will ever come a time when government will say, I'm very happy that you want to find out some misdeeds and I'll willingly submit. I doubt that day will come. I really doubt that day will come. Thanks.
I want to say that the opportunity for a fireside chat has been robust. But the other thing that I want to stress on is that with the theme for these last 2 days session being Securing Our Future, the fierce urgency of now, I'd like to give His Excellency the last word, just in case we haven't touched on some subject matters that is burning inside of you that have not come out yet. If you can, in the next few minutes, share with us going forward what you have for not only the private sector, but also the power of collaboration between the private and public sector, Your Excellency.
Yes, thank you. I think first, I think the primary thing for me is hope. I think there is a great deal of, I think we must focus on what this country offers, just in terms of all of the resources we have, human, natural, all the resources we have, and also the will, the energy, the innovativeness of the Nigerian. I think that this sort of country, a country with all that we have, simply cannot fail. And it is only a matter of getting things right, getting a few things right, moving a few things around, and we'll be well on our way to the kind of progress that we ought to experience as a country. And quite frankly, I do not believe that that is necessarily a difficult thing. Politics, governance, and all of that can get in the way sometimes of development and of progress. So you're trying to achieve certain objectives, but there are all manner of hindrances, difficulties, etc. But at the same time, I think that we're learning. I think that we're getting better at being able to deliver. For example, we all recognize that for us it's not policy. It's implementing, it's getting things done. So we're looking at what is the fastest way of moving from point A to point B in terms of policy. We recognize, for example, that look at issues of corruption, right? So let's even leave high-level corruption to just, I want to obtain a passport, I want to obtain a license, any approvals from government agencies, etc. We recognize that the more we're able to remove discretion from individuals, the more we're able to put services on electronic platforms, removing all that need for interference and all that, the better. Now, in some cases, even that is subverted, but it's because we haven't been able to work it end to end. So, even in establishments where things are supposed to happen online, you might still end up in front of a government official who says that unless you part with money, that you are not going to be able to get the service. But we can do it end to end. And it is possible for us to develop those systems, and we're developing those systems to be able to do end-to-end, apply online, and get it online. Some of it has been in fits and starts. For example, when we started under the ease of doing business, our visa on arrival, yes, we were able to achieve a good measure of momentum, but there are constraints, there are problems. But we now know how to move from point A to point B. And I believe very strongly that all of the great ideas that we have, the young people waiting to unleash simply all their energy and their resourcefulness on the world, I think all of those are just waiting to happen. And I believe very strongly that this country, affords us the opportunity, it affords us the space to be able to achieve great things. So for me, I think we should just keep our focus and just focus on hope, and especially the private sector. I believe that the private sector in Nigeria, I mean, there's no, just in terms of resilience, coping with stuff. I think we've done very, very well. I think private sector has done very well indeed. And I strongly believe that with what we have learned, even coping with the post-pandemic business after the pandemic, and how we've been able to, transport, for example, went down 49% in the COVID. Now they're back to 77%. The construction went down by almost 40%. I mean, it's a much more modest back to positive. But we can see that there is, there's a will to do things. There's energy. There is, resilience, resourcefulness. So my take is that this country is one that is waiting to happen, and it will happen, and it will take all our resources and all of our own, all of our effort to make it happen, and it will happen.
Amen. It will happen.